Welcome back, and let's open with a word of prayer. Dear God of heaven and earth, we delight in all that you provide for us. Beauty in nature and rest, health, the essentials of life, and the love that upholds your whole universe and that we get to partake of with you and with the relationships that we have with family and friends. Thank you, Lord, for being there for us and for teaching and guiding us. We ask that your presence will be with us now and inform our study and our discussion. And we thank you in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. And let me just see if I can. There we go. I'll just see if that's going to work a little bit. I'm going to mix it up again a little bit. We all are aware of what happened yesterday with the US Supreme Court. And so I was sort of finalizing my study that had been in the works, ready for today. I persevered, but it was as I was, quote unquote, burning the midnight oil, sort of like maca, to finish off that I really was convinced that looking a little bit at what happened yesterday, June 24th, 2022, was in order. And I knew we maybe wouldn't have had too much time. I certainly didn't have too much time, which is why I'm perhaps going to lean on you all a little bit as well. And we'll do it as an interactive discussion more than an actual study as such. Just looking at abortion and working through a little bit, finishing off with what it is that will possibly be some of the effects, some of the results of what has happened. None of us see into the future, quote unquote, crystal ball available at all, but God knows, and he's going to continue through our Vespers and our other camp meetings and different things, unpack more of just all that will be unfolding. And as it unfolds, and even as we look back on things as they happen. But at any rate, so this study, we're going to address the issue of abortion from a variety of angles: historical perspectives, individual perspectives, national perspectives, American states, the US, and the overturning of Roe versus Wade yesterday and what it possibly will mean. So bear with me, I haven't got it all polished study by any means, but I felt it was needful, and I'm sure we will have studies in the future dealing with what happened yesterday, or incorporating in with some of the left and right unpacking that we're doing right now. But at any rate, do feel free, please, to unmute and add in your 2 cents at any point. And I'm going to first share a screen to just review a little bit of an article probably many of us have seen. Boy, that was the wrong one. Go. Let me see. And this is the political article that appeared in 2014, May of 2014. And it basically highlights a little bit of the strategy of the religious right. So this first section, A, historical perspectives, this is just going to be a quick brief history of how abortion was used by the religious right. And I didn't have time yet even to go through and sort of highlight. I like doing that, just to read portions and so on. So forgive me, but I'm not going to read the whole article or each of the different things that I bring up on the screen, but let's see. Well, we'll just read the first paragraph. One of the most durable myths in recent history is that the religious right, the coalition of conservative evangelicals and fundamentalists, emerged as a political movement in response to the US Supreme Court's 1973 Roe versus Wade ruling legalizing abortion. And they sort of morally woke up and, kind of thing. And then it quotes Jerry Falwell and just, the anger. And as that came about, and we've got to rally and we've got to, counter this and on moral grounds and et cetera, et cetera. And it goes on to say that the abortion myth quickly collapses under historical scrutiny. In fact, it wasn't until 1979, a full 6 years after Roe, that evangelical leaders at the behest of conservative activist Paul Weyrich seized on abortion, not for moral reasons, but as a rallying cry to deny President Jimmy Carter a second term. So the agenda is starting to come out.
Debby, could you do me a favor and just make the writing, page wide or something, just so that we can see a little bit better?
Yes, sorry, Henry. I always forget to do some of these.
Thank you very much.
Let me just see. So I just have to do it as a resume. It's on Safari. Sorry, I should have done that sooner. Try it for one more, because then it gets rid of the ads nicely. Is that okay, Henry? I'll use you as the
Yeah, it's definitely much more legible now. I appreciate that.
I can maybe do it one more time. Whoops. Okay. So there it's pretty much. Oh,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so that's where I was reading. Why? So why does the myth fall apart? Because the anti-abortion crusade was more palatable, or pardon me, why did they seize on for moral reasons on abortion? Why? Because the anti-abortion crusade was more palatable than the religious right's real motive, which we know some of the history in this article goes through it a bit down below. The religious right's real motive, protecting segregated schools. So it was a racist reason. They were actually upholding in essence, what we would describe today as women's right for reproductive rights. In a sense, they didn't see abortion as an issue in the beginning. And let me just see, I'll read the part. Actually, maybe I will read this other paragraph. Today, evangelicals make up the backbone of the pro-life movement, but it hasn't always been so. Both before and for several years after Roe, evangelicals were overwhelmingly indifferent to the subject, which they considered, quote unquote, a Catholic issue. And Tiffany brought that out a little bit in her study a while back. In 1968, for instance, a symposium sponsored by the Christian Medical Society and Christianity Today, flagship magazine of evangelicalism, refused to characterize abortion as sinful, citing individual health, family welfare, and social responsibilities as justifications for ending a pregnancy. In 1971, delegates to the Southern Baptist Convention in St. Louis, Missouri, passed a resolution encouraging, quote, Southern Baptists to work for legislation that will allow the possibility of abortion under such conditions as rape, incest, clear evidence of severe fetal deformity, and carefully ascertained evidence of the likelihood of damage to the emotional, mental, and physical health of the mother, end quote. The convention, hardly a redoubt of liberal values, in other words, Southern Baptists are very, very conservative, reaffirmed that position in 1974, 1 year after Roe, and again in 1976. And so, well, actually, I will read this one. This is W.A. Criswell of Southern Baptist Convention, which, as I say, very, very conservative. Quoting him, I have always felt that it was only after a child was born and had life separate from its mother that it became an individual person. And it has always, therefore, seemed to me that what is best for the mother and for the future should be allowed. So then it brings out in terms of yes, this paragraph. In May 1969, a group of African-American parents in Holmes County, Mississippi, sued the Treasury Department to prevent 3 new whites-only K-12 private academies from securing full tax-exempt status, arguing that their discriminatory policies and their whites-only segregated school prevented them from being considered, quote unquote, charitable institutions. The schools had been founded in the mid-1960s in response to the desegregation of public schools set in motion by the Brown versus Board of Education decision of 1954. In 1969, the first year of desegregation, the number of white students enrolled in public schools in Holmes County dropped from 771 to 28. The following year, that number fell to 0. And we know that correlation between the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and this whole civil rights preliminary, building up to the civil rights movement that had happened actually in earlier decades, but certainly in the 1950s, and obviously with the civil rights movement itself really taking off in the 1960s. And so, and then Paul Weirich's involvement. I'm just going to read his quote sort of in the middle here. The new political philosophy must be defined by us, conservatives, in moral terms, packaged in non-religious language and propagated throughout the country by our new coalition, Weirich wrote in the mid-1970s. When political power is achieved, this is the moral majority. When political power is achieved, the moral majority will have the opportunity to recreate this nation. Weyrich believed that the political possibilities of such a coalition were unlimited. The leadership, moral philosophy, and workable vehicle are at hand. Abortion. Just waiting to be blended and activated. If the moral majority acts, results could well exceed our wildest dreams. And here we are down to June 2022, and we have a real enactment for certain that they worked towards and were hoping they would end up getting. Okay, further in terms of just the history, a little bit of abortion. I'm just going to quickly trace this through. NARL, pro-choice America is the current modern moniker name that they have put on an organization that has been active for decades, and deal with that a little bit more. In the 1960s, a movement led by family planning and feminists emerged to challenge state anti-abortion laws, resulting in the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade versus Wade Supreme Court ruling, which legalized abortion throughout the US. Late 1960s to early 1970s. Both sides fought within the legislative and legal systems, state and federal. The pro-choice side knew the problem was illegal abortions and saw in the 1960s that the solution was legalizing the procedure, using marches, demonstrations, protests, lawsuits, and lobbying. At that period, a lot of women were losing their lives to abortions that were less than ideal. And there were a lot of factors being involved with the drive to push for pro-choice. And the feminists, and certainly the radical feminists, definitely weighed in on that. Various movements at the time, 1973, such as the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, the IMCA, didn't catch what it all stood for, but the LCCR, Law Center for Constitutional Rights, with lawyers, feminists, and single-issue abortion activists, collaborated together. 1973, the pro-choice movement was comparatively strong, with many movement participants and professional groups filed friend of the court briefs in favor of legal abortion in both the Roe and Doe cases. Two cases, and both the women, now dead, but had been alive following after their cases ruled on in 1973 by the US Supreme Court. But a lot of other people, this friend of the court kind of brief, lots were put forward. I can't quite remember the number now, but it was a lot, thousands. Actively soliciting them broadcast throughout the movement. So 1973, the anti-abortion counter movement. So backlash and a counter movement always comes, as we know, filed very few such briefs because they had no active strategy to solicit such briefs. So after Roe v. Wade in 1973 and through the 1980s, the pro-choice movement stayed active due to, number one, professional leadership, and the emphasis has to be on formalized organizational structures being in place. And this was one of the things that really, really activated the evangelical religious right. They saw, Paul Weyrich, but many others as well, that they would have to motivate and activate and organize. The pro-choice movement stayed active due to this leadership and organization. Number two, threats from the anti-abortion pro-life movement. And three, burgeoning grassroots participation in the move as the movement developed, organized, and grew. Last two historical few notes. After Roe v. Wade, the anti-abortion movement sought a constitutional amendment that would punish abortion as murder, but were unsuccessful. In the 70s and 80s, early 80s, going for a constitutional convention was one of the ploys, and it was on. There were a couple of issues back in that time period, and a constitutional convention. And it was with the purpose of trying to amend the Constitution. And why, in part, a constitutional convention never occurred in that time period was the very reason there was a fear that once you open up the opportunity to amend the Constitution, the way the process works, it could allow amendments on, in a sense, any issue or any part of the Constitution. So they sought state restrictions tremendously limiting access to abortion, and this proved successful. And both movement, the pro-choice movement and counter movement, anti-abortion, would agree that a smaller number of abortions is a desirable outcome. And then there was politicians, obviously Reagan as president, and Bush Sr., war on abortion. And then up to last year, this agency, NARAL, is pro-choice America, is fighting to prevent the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the criminalizing of abortion, and the punishing of women. So the little bit of history, just so there's a bit of a review. And I want to, well, actually, I do want to share my document. Individual perspectives. And forgive me, I'm going to read this again, not to have too much of the reading side of things, but abortion through the eyes of a potential methonym. This crossed my path, and it was worthy of repeating. The female anatomy, abortion is one of those things that it can involve miscarriage, a pregnancy gone wrong. It can involve accident, injury. It can involve something going sideways in the course of a pregnancy, whereby, the egg is fertilized in the fallopian tube, or just any number of medical situations that can arise that can potentially put the woman's life at risk, not to mention in cases of rape and incest and all of the things that are out there that affect a woman getting pregnancy against her will, against her wishes. And then coupled with that, the oopsies, the accidents that sometimes end up happening. An older couple that suddenly discover the woman's pregnant, whatever the age happens to be beyond what they are wanting to raise a family. Anyway, this is a young person's tape, as I say, potentially an epidemic. I think it's culturally time for us to reframe how we think about the uterus. It's not a nurturing organ. It doesn't need to be. A fetus is frighteningly good at getting the resources it needs to nurture itself. If they are implanted anywhere other than the womb, most often the fallopian tube, but also sometimes the bladder, the intestine, the pelvic muscles, and connective tissue, and the liver, placental walls will rip through a body, slaughtering everything in their path as they seek out arteries to slake their hunger for nutrients. Fetal cells will happily grow in any of these places, digesting and puncturing tissue, paralyzing and enlarging arteries, raising blood pressure to feed itself more, faster. But it will be unable to be ejected. It's no coincidence that genes involved in embryonic development have been implicated in how cancer spreads. Rather than a soft, cozy nest, a womb is a fortress designed to protect the person from the developing cells inside them. Because of our huge and metabolically speaking, expansive brains, which means it could be expensive brains, human fetal development requires unrestricted access to a parent's blood supply, which makes pregnancy and miscarriage too, by the way, incredibly dangerous for the carrier, the pregnant woman. The uterus has evolved to control and restrict whether placental cells can get that access, and to eject it before it develops enough to kill the host. The function of the womb is to protect the parent's life. The very structure of the womb very firmly prioritizes the life of the parent over the life of the fetus. Even with modern medical care, at least 800 people die every day from pregnancy and childbirth-related causes. Among developed countries, the United States has one of the highest rates of maternal mortality in the world, and Texas has one of the highest rates within that. The rate is even higher when viewed among BIPOC only. I've forgotten, indigenous people of color. Pregnancy may be necessary for the continuation of the species, but it is not a joke. It is a life-threatening event, a parasitic attack on a human body. Just one we have romanticized and desensitized to. The miracle of birth is that we have a protective organ designed to, if all goes well, let us survive it. It doesn't always go well. It is life or death. Someone who chooses to get pregnant, stay pregnant, and carry a fetus to delivery is legitimately choosing to risk their life to do it. Nobody else has the right to make anyone do that. and nobody should be punished or vilified for not wanting to do it. Forcing someone to carry a pregnancy, any pregnancy, is attempted murder. Abortion is a human right. So a little bit different perspective, perhaps, but very definitely the fact remains that a lot of women in 21st century time die in pregnancy. And this is one of the fears that the result of the US Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade that occurred yesterday has been there, and radical feminists have sounded the clarion call for years. They knew that things were shaping up over the last decade, indicating that Roe v. Wade was going to be at risk, and certainly within the last, I'll say 3 years, 4 years, with the development of the midnight cry, many externally were recognizing the danger signs all around them and giving warnings. Anyway, the next section I wanted to just look at was some national perspectives, and I need to go to a different document. And this is a woman writing tail end of last year on the effect of Roe v. Wade being potentially at that time overturned, and she was looking at it from a Latin American perspective and what the impact would be and the effects and so on. So I won't read the whole article, but just highlight a few things. I didn't have time to quote unquote highlight, but we'll go through it a little bit. So she's speaking in terms of Central America and South America, and just comments, the continent has some of the most restrictive abortion laws in the world, in spite of recent progressive reforms in the past decade in countries including Uruguay and Argentina. So El Salvador's courts have sentenced women who have had a miscarriage to 30 years in prison. Amazingly, that and it's not El Salvador alone. And so treating an obstetric emergency, so a miscarriage, as if it's an abortion. And we just possibly read in WhatsApp one of the articles that was posted at one point there yesterday, in terms of an 11-year-old young lady in Brazil having been raped, and a judge was under investigation for a female judge for possibly blocking the young girl's opportunity to have an abortion in Brazil. And eventually it got overruled and she was able to have the abortion. And she herself just voicing, I don't want to carry this baby to term. I mean, can you imagine an 11-year-old being raped and then having to endure the punishment of carrying a child, a baby, or a fetus to term, and then having to be the mother of that child. In Honduras, where abortion is already illegal in all circumstances, Congress amended the Constitution to state that life starts at conception. Against this dismal legal backdrop, Roe v. Wade has long been a source of inspiration to women in Latin America fighting for their basic rights. It has given us a strategic model. This woman writing is an activist in favor of abortion. It has given us a strategic model as well as strong legal arguments against constitutional obstacles. Like women in the US, we've taken our cases to court, sometimes securing significant and progressive gains in the last decade. Okay, and in Colombia, my son and his family just having been there last weekend. With the election, the left side won on Sunday. But in Colombia, the Constitutional Court, and I'll just actually mention that the vice president is now a female woman that was raised in poverty, so is outside the Colombian usual status quo for holding public office. Anyway, in Colombia, the Constitutional Court ruled in 2006 that women could have an abortion in cases involving rape or incest when it posed a risk to the pregnant person's life or health, or when the fetus was diagnosed with severe malformations, which basically was the position for a lot of states in the United States at some point in time. Continuing on, in Brazil, the Supreme Court in 2012 authorized abortion if a fetus is found to have anencephaly, a condition that leads to miscarriage or death in the first weeks of life. And the court is considering another case that could decriminalize all abortions in the first 12 weeks. Most recently, the Mexican Supreme Court declared the criminalization of abortion unconstitutional and mandated that state legislatures across the country act on that ruling. In all of these cases, activists drew on the arguments in Roe v. Wade for their successful litigation strategy, and judges cited the landmark case and related rulings in making their decisions. So we can see the influence of, if you like, a superpower, nation of the world, such as the United States, leading and putting into place a progressive sanctioning of women's rights and reproductive rights and birth control and contraception rights. These laws that have come into the United States through much fighting and arguing and debating and so on, but have had a ripple effect outward in the world, certainly Mexico and Central America, Latin America being connected, North America and Central and South America all being in the same latitude, or pardon me, longitudinal spread. It has had a definite impact on Latin America. So here's reference to yesterday's case. If the US state of Mississippi succeeds in overturning Roe v. Wade, after nearly 50 years, we will lose this crucial legal precedent and endanger progress on reproductive rights throughout Latin America. And I'm thinking I'm going to leave this article here. Yes. So And I'm going to just pause it here for a moment, stop the screen share. Should I click on the right one? And I want to thank Murray for, he made a comment with the young potential Nephilim's post. And he just was commenting, this point of view sure changes the way you might think about abortion. And certainly it is a little different perspective than what you generally are hearing about. But I want to just pause for a moment and just ask if there are any comments or anything, anybody, I mean, all of us, you know, yesterday we're clicking on some of the different stories, and I'll come to that just as we finish off. I'm hopeful not to take too much longer, because we're way past time anyway, even when we started. But any comments that anybody wants to make, or anything that you happen to read or see yourself, or just even conversations that you've had just in the last bit as this decision came down, or just before. So
Before the,
yes.
yeah, I mean, I got a little comment here. Just a conversation that I had with my brother. He seems to be also much more in the direction of pro-life movement. And I just asked him also the question, you know, well, what about women whose lives are at stake and things like that? And he says, well, I mean, you know, you have in the Bible there, you know, people like Sarah, and I mean, various different people who had lost their lives, you know, even at the giving of a childbirth. And so, you know, he said, so let it be if this is the way that God sees it. And, you know, so he, even though that it's life-threatening to the women, you know, he was willing to put more life on the child more than anything. But at the same time, I really definitely see it, you know, especially for, you know, say, for example, there's cases like you have mentioned there with that 11-year-old. And you know, it's just not right for a little child to be carrying a pregnancy through and, you know, go through the consequences, you know, especially in such an early age, especially in a rape type of a situation. So, and, you know, like I had mentioned at one point in time, you know, having read the article with El Salvador, whose laws are strictly anti-abortion, or not anti, yeah, anti-abortion. So where should there be a miscarriage, they would see it as a murder, as you had mentioned. And the women just automatically, you know, as soon as they come and have that miscarriage in the hospital, now they're in prison for years. And it's just like all the rights of the women are just being taken away. And yeah, it's strange that, you know, people would put such legislation to something like that where there's no more rights for women.
You know, Henry, you're right. And I just drew up on the whiteboard a spectrum, and I won't take time to fill it in, but we can understand, and you're correct. Some people will say they're pro-life, but at the same time will warrant that there are circumstances, and it will vary, you know, again, a bit of a spectrum, that there are some circumstances where it, in a sense, almost as common sense, but where abortion would be warranted. And that becomes different things to different people, and beyond the individual, to different states or to different countries around the world or whatever. And just as a little bit of a lead in, I am going to, actually I will share screen again for a moment, because I'm going to speak to one article. And again, we aren't going to look at it. But oh boy, shoot that back up to the top. Just a second to lose your controls. Anyway, this is well, it's an article, as you can see, September 10th, 2021. Sandra Day O'Connor sat on the US Supreme Court. And this is, okay, so that actually is going to, anyway, there's Jane, no, it wasn't Jane Doe. Well, she was the Jane Doe, but it was, what's her name? Covey. That was the Roe v. Wade woman involved, and that's it. This is her lawyer at that time. She ended up getting a new lawyer, but or Norma McCorvey. That's it. Jane Roe in the 1973 court case, and her attorney Gloria Allred. And this was taken 1989, April 26, 1989. Oh boy, that's pretty small, so you're not going to be seeing that. I don't know if I can make it any larger. Or, no. Let me see. If not, I'll just read it. The part that I wanted to, oh, sorry. Oh, boy. I probably won't make it any bigger. It's not going up too large as it is. So the Sandra O'Connor joined the Supreme Court in 1981. And what I wanted to highlight, Henry, picks up on the remark you were just saying in the conversation, you know, with your brother. Well, and actually maybe I will read this 2 paragraphs. What happened in the years after Roe was not a natural evolution, as many people think. It was cultivated. It was a party realignment that was carefully staged, managed. It wasn't until 1980, with the platform that Reagan ran on, 7 years after Roe, that the Republican Party said, we are committed to the right to life, right? Paul Weyrich, moral majority, they see this steamroller. They can manufacture the threat. The perceived threat is moral. It's abortion. It's the sanctity of life, and it's contrary to God. And it camouflaged the racist overtones and the real ire that the religious right had against desegregating schools, and which is why they started independent Christian schools, and Jerry Falwell and Liberty University and all the rest included. I just want to, forgive me to scroll, I'm being like Trevor for a minute. Yes, it's this middle paragraph here. This is Sandra Day O'Connor. Her first public Supreme Court opinion on abortion came in the Akron case in 1983. Akron v. Akron Center for Reproductive Health. She had been on the court for 2 years. The Akron case served up to the court a series of abortion restrictions that really challenged Roe v. Wade. and some of these were repeated in Texas last year, but including, and other states, including requirements for all abortions performed after the first trimester to be done in hospitals, parental consent before the procedure could be performed on an unmarried minor, doctors to counsel prospective parents, a 24-hour waiting period, and that fetal remains be disposed of in a humane and sanitary manner. The court reaffirmed Roe, and O'Connor dissented, saying, I believe that the state's interest in protecting potential human life exists throughout the pregnancy. But it's the next little phase in her journey sitting on the Supreme Court. It was obvious there were 4 justices opposed to that, and there were 4 justices fully for that. And everybody assumed that O'Connor was going to be also fully for undercutting Roe. But she wouldn't go along. She wrote a separate opinion deciding the case very narrowly. In other words, she was going to allow for abortion, but just narrow it, but still keep it open if all the criteria is met, that there still could be situations where, things could be addressed. And just finishing that paragraph, she said there may be a time in the future to deal with the bigger, deeper issue, but that time has not arrived. And I was just wondering if there was another place where she weighed in. Yes. No, it wasn't that paragraph. Okay, I'm not finding it quickly enough, so I won't belabor it, but that was a case of someone who sort of, in a sense, sits on the fence a little bit. But anyway, I wanted to just go to the next section, and oh, pardon me. I think I lost my one section. Anyway, I'll go to an interactive map that that ends up providing a bit of information. Sorry, my phone is receiving phone calls and texts, and anyway, I'm just ignoring. Just I'm looking for my map because I did have it in my document. And I see that it's not there in the section that I have it in. Ah, boy. Anyway, that's too bad. Some of you can probably identify when you end up, losing something that you have wanted not to lose. And I'll make this larger, because it is an interactive map, and it's done by this NARAL Pro-Choice America group. But the breakdown across the US, and we certainly have heard of some of the various states, but the blue color, as it displays, strongly protected access to abortion. So those states, Democratic Democrat-controlled states basically still have controlled, strongly protected access for women seeking abortion. So you can see the number of blue states is not very great. And the next is the more bluish tinged purple kind of color that has protected access, such as Nevada and New Mexico. The purple, in the middle, the spectrum of purple, bluish on one side, purple, reddish purple on the other side. And so it has some access allowed, Colorado, Iowa, or Minnesota and Iowa, and then over again, Virginia. But the reddish, and a couple of the small states, but the reddish spectrum of purple, restricted access. They're the ones that have trigger laws and have just a variety of different things in place. Have to wait the 24-hour period. You have to have parental consent. You have to have, just a lot of restrictions. And then the red, I'll go to North Dakota. Governor of North Dakota is quite a character, female. Anyway, severely restricted access. So you can see the preponderance, even at the state level. The majority, it was at one point 60%, higher than that, of the American public was in favor of the freedoms, the no restrictions to abortion. And then under that, there would be a percentage of people, as we were just discussing, that would have qualifications. They would have caveats they would put in place, well, in situations of rape, in situations of incest, in situations of this, and this, we would allow for abortion to occur. And so at this point, I'm going to come to the final segment. Go ahead, Ali. Yes, go ahead and interrupt.
Ask a question.
Yes.
That previous slide with the colors on the map of America.
Yes.
That was you were discussing about the different states that would allow abortion still in that county or state.
Yes.
So is that current as of yesterday still?
This is going to be not following on after yesterday,
Right.
Ali, quite honestly, because the federal level right away, it's, as this next article pointed out, states have had in their, and I don't think I did keep the one article. I had an article, I'm sorry, that I guess I took out of my bar, that had a breakdown a little bit, just in paragraph form. So, still would have had to be read, but, 18 states, they were ready. The moment Roe versus Wade would be struck down, if it was to be overturned. And of course, Justice Alito's, the leak of his draft document there 2 months back did exactly that. you know, a lot of people, they could see the writing on the wall at that point. And of course, people, the Supreme Court justices were, oh, no, we're not going to overturn it. It's just a draft document, you know, much more back and forth and more submissions, et cetera, are going to be happening. But radical feminists in particular were the ones, they had it pegged exactly right. And it was in the last couple of years, they already saw the writing on the wall that brought us to yesterday, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But certainly with the leak of that draft document, it really did. You know, the clarion call was out. Roe v. Wade is going to get overturned, and you could deny it if you like, to be politically expedient and to try to hide your agenda until it's a done deal. But we see. So
may I ask?
yes, Ali, go ahead. Yeah, and then Henry will get to your question too. Go ahead, Ali.
Of course, it's all new. It's not new. We've known that this was going to happen anyways when they agitated this a few months ago, and that it was going to happen, that they were going to overturn it completely. And I'm going to have to watch current news or read current opinion pieces or whatever. But I'm just wondering, maybe in advance, is there any state that's allowed to do abortion, or is this a law that's saying no state is allowed to do abortion from yesterday forward?
That's a very good question, Al, and I'm not certain, unfortunately, that I have the answer to that. From my understanding of it yesterday, and others can weigh in. As I say, this is just an interactive discussion just on this topic, just simply because it was so timely. You know, I didn't want to sneak past without us at least having opportunity to have a look at it a little bit. The understanding that I have is that there was a provision still whereby women could, they weren't going to, and I'm taking this from Joe Biden's remarks in the speech that he gave yesterday, as well as a woman, I've forgotten now who it was, but I ended up watching a little video clip of a woman weighing in as well. I think she was a governor. That was it. She was governor of, boy, I've forgotten now which state, maybe New York, the new governor of New York. But at any rate, weighing in and just indicating that women have the right to travel, and that right is not going to be taken away ever. And sort of vowing, President Biden, as well as the New York governor, and that they're going to fight. And that, I think it was Joe Biden that was saying that, you know, women traveling to in a sense, a friendly state, a state where abortion still yet would be allowed, is going to be safeguarded, so that those women, if they're able to do it, but then it becomes an economic thing, right? And a, you know, logistical thing and all the rest of it. But at least to my understanding, there are still states right now at this point in time where abortion would be allowed, and where women from states that possibly would instantly, as of yesterday, if not by Monday, be passing legislation whereby abortion is just absolutely off the table. Women could still travel to another state and at this point be able to receive an abortion. And again, it's this tension between federal and state jurisdictions. And it's sort of like with the drugs and some of these other different issues. At the federal level, things can be deemed illegal, gay marriage, or legal or illegal, gay marriage becoming legal Supreme Court, US Supreme Court at the federal level, mandating that it's legal. And yet some states still, you know, it was definitely very illegal. And but then, I mean, with the Supreme Court, it became, you know, across the land kind of thing. So I'm not sure with abortion, if at the federal level, it being disallowed,
But I also want to
that they
include,
still, in some states, are able to allow abortions. Go ahead, Alan. And then Henry, we're not forgetting you.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to mention, I do have an updated version of the map that has put it into effect right away, and those that are soon to be in effect. So if you want me to just share the screen, I can do so for a moment.
Okay, Henry, I definitely will let you share screen. I'll just weigh in with Murray's comment. I'm not sure, Murray, if you want to open your mic and say it, but if not, I can read it. Roe v. Wade made it a constitutional right to an abortion by overturning it. It is now up to each state to decide their own abortion laws. So thank you for that clarification. So that's where the states, yes, there will be some states that will still be allowing abortion, and those few states will, and we'll let Henry maybe share the screen as he's got it there. Let's see, can I stop? Spotlight. And
Hang on a second here. Okay. All right. Yeah. See right there?
So in effect, expected soon. So the dark red abortion bans are in effect right now. So tracking where abortion is now banned. And Henry, can you see? Yeah, this is New York Times. That's excellent.
That's
okay,
right.
That's
So
it.
it says an earlier version of the article misstated the legal status of abortion in Utah. As of 4 p.m. on June 24th, the state attorney general had issued a statement saying that state abortion ban had been triggered, but it had not yet been authorized by the legislators' general counsel. So again, you can see the things that are in effect right away are the dark red, and soon to be affected are the lighter red. So these are the ones that are definitely affected right away. And then you can still see various different ones that haven't been touched on yet.
and I want to add, you can see that that's mainly the Bible Belt down there in the US too. That's the dark red, and soon to be the orange part will be dark red too. That's interesting. What does the gray represent? The states that haven't decided yet, or what?
It's not put into effect yet. Nothing is mentioned yet on those areas yet.
And some of them being Democrat states possibly won't, but we saw how limited on the other map, how limited those blue states were in number. So, I mean, Texas, it's interesting that expected soon with Texas because I'm guessing by Monday, if not Tuesday, early next week, there'll be quite a few more states that will have passed through their legislature, the abortion bans that they've had sitting on the books waiting in the last few weeks just for this day, yesterday. Henry, could I suggest, would you be willing to put that link in the chat for any that may want that? Because that's
Is that
probably the
regarding,
updated in real time, sort of as it changes, I'm guessing, with it being the New York Times.
yeah, I mean, I got all sorts of different articles from New York Times, all kind of linked together here if somebody's interested.
Hey, that looks lovely. Yes. As I say, I got one from The Guardian, and that's sort of what we were going to go to now, just in closing kind of thing, just sort of what will the effect be on that? And this will be one effect, spreading state by state by state, where the abortion bans go into place. I think one of the other things that we also were aware of, Charles Thomas, in giving his decision yesterday, or the decision yesterday, was interesting. Like even Brett Kavanaugh didn't, in a sense, echo what Charles Thomas had said in his remarks, because Charles Thomas commented something to the effect of, we may need to revisit some of these other constitutional enactments, in essence, that have happened over the last few years, to do with contraception, and I think he actually did say LGBTQ rights, or no, marriage. That was it. He said in terms of marital, yeah. Anyway, I'll just say marriage. And that was one of the things even radical feminists had started recognizing, that if Roe v. Wade falls, it could start not necessarily an avalanche, but certainly a big waterfall eating away at other rights that have been hard-won battles, including contraception and some of the court cases that we've looked at as a movement back over time, and the LGBTQ rights, being able to be gay, being able to marry who you love, who you choose, and some of these other things. Henry,
Yeah, I just
thank you very much.
provided this as a PDF so that everybody can view it.
Wonderful. Yes. And I can maybe show, I'll bring up as I say, the one article. Let me just share a screen first. Well, I'll read Murray's comment before I get out of this. Indeed, they said the court's opinion means that, quote unquote, from the very moment of fertilization, a woman has no rights to speak of. A state can force her to bring a pregnancy to term, even at the steepest personal and familial costs, end quote. I mean, it's astounding. It is astounding. In 2022, we have regressed back. I mean, 50 years, but it even, is going to be taking us further back than that. Thank you, Murray. That was excellent. So let me just see if I can bring up my Guardian article. Roe v. Wade has been overturned. Here's what this will mean. This young woman writes some pretty good articles. And I'll start reading. I didn't have time to highlight or anything. I didn't actually even get through all of the articles, so I'll see whether it's worth reading more of it. But the story is not about the Supreme Court. Today, the sword that has long been hanging over American women's heads finally fell. The Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, ending the nationwide right to an abortion. This has long been expected and long dreaded by those in the reproductive rights movement, and it has long been denied by those who wish to downplay the court's extremist lurch. The coming hours will be consumed with finger pointing and recriminations, but the story is not about who was right and who was wrong. Nor is the story about the US judiciary's crumbling legitimacy or the Supreme Court's fractious internal politics. In the coming days, our attention will be called to the justices themselves, to their feelings, to their careers, to their safety. We will be distracted by the stench of partisanship and scandal that emanates from the shadowy halls of 1 First Street, Supreme Court, by the justices' grievance airing and petty backbiting in public, or by their vengeful paranoid investigation into the leak of a draft of Samuel Alito's opinion some weeks ago. We will be scolded not to protest outside their houses, and we will be prevented by high fences and heavy gates and the presence of armed cops from protesting outside the court itself. But the story is not about the Supreme Court. Even Joe Biden in his remarks ended with that very thing. Non-violent. Protest with no violence. The story is not about the Democratic politicians whose leadership on abortion rights has been tepid at best and negligent at worst since the 1990s. In the coming days, people who have voted to uphold the Hyde Amendment, a provision that has banned federal funding of abortion since 1976, effectively limiting the constitutional right to an abortion to only those Americans wealthy enough to afford one. So the Hyde Amendment really showed, revealed, highlighted the inequity with poorer Americans, particularly people of color. Effectively limiting the constitutional right, to an abortion to only those Americans wealthy enough to afford one, will tell us how terrible this is. They will issue statements talking about their outrage. They will make platitude-filled speeches about the worth and dignity of American women. They will not mention their own inaction, persisting for decades in the face of mounting and well-funded right-wing threats to Roe. There's a lot of money on the right. And that was part of the reason with the moral majority and this whole push to organize, they did a lot of fundraising. They did a lot of letter writing, and it's continued obviously in different contexts to this day, now dealing with abortion. They will not mention that they did nothing, as all of that worth and dignity of American women hung in the balance. They will not mention that most of them still, even now, oppose doing the only thing that could possibly restore reproductive freedom, expanding the number of justices on the courts. But the cowardice, hypocrisy, and historic moral failure of national Democrats, the left, is not the story. This is this compromise, right? And certainly the story is nothing so vulgar as what this withdrawal of human rights might mean for that party's midterm election prospects. The story is not even about the legal chaos that will now follow. It is not about the fact that in 13 states, today's order has made all abortion immediately illegal. And Murray asked the question, did the Democrats compromise on abortion rights? Not really, Murray, in the sense that they pay lip service. They state very clearly, you know, they're on the side of pro-life and abortion rights, reproductive rights, and et cetera, et cetera. But where the compromise has come in is they have held in various states the power, the balance of power. And they have not taken seriously the threat to women's rights and to reproductive rights and birth control and contraception and et cetera. And so in a sense, they dropped the ball. And in other states where they don't have the power, Republicans are in power. And sometimes there's a mixture. As at the federal level, there can be a mixture. One holds one house and the other holds the other house at the state level. But at the same time, they have, even where Republicans have been in power, they have not, like she uses the word, the cowardice, because it's a battle, right? Hypocrisy and historic moral failure. And at the national level, but even at the state level, when they had opportunity and they let it slip through their fingers, so to speak. So, and you've added slaves were second-class citizens and women are second-class citizens, yes. Anyway, it is not about the fact that in 13 states today's order has made all abortion immediately illegal. The consummation of sexist ambitions that had long been enshrined in so-called trigger laws, provisions that have been on the books for years and decades that ban abortion upon the court's reversal of Roe, misogyny lying in wait. Nor is the story about the other 13 states that will almost certainly ban abortion now too, meaning that the procedure will be illegal in 26 of the nation's 50 states within weeks. The story is not about how legislatures, lawyers, and judges will handle these laws. It is not about whether they will allow merciful exemptions for rape or incest. They won't. Or impose draconian measures that aim to extend the cruelty of state bans beyond their borders to target abortion doctors, funders, and supporters in blue states. They will. And I'm going to skip down and just see. The real story is the women. The real story is the student whose appointment is scheduled for tomorrow, who will get a call from the clinic sometime in the next hours telling her that no, they are sorry. They cannot give her an abortion after all. And on the scenarios go, the real story is about thousands of these women, not just now, but for decades to come. The women whose lives will be made smaller and less dignified by unplanned and unchosen pregnancies. The women whose health will be endangered by the long and grueling physical process of pregnancy. The women and others who will have to forego dreams, end educations, curtail careers, stretch their finances beyond the breaking point, and subvert their own wills to someone else. I'll leave it for the rest of us to finish that and other articles that I know are already out there, and videos, and I'm sure Elder Tess will be weighing in, and also more than likely at some point Elder Perminder. It's a prophetic development. It's something that we foresaw, and as Jonathan and others have said, Henry. And it's sad. It's sad. Any other question or comment anybody would like to make as we get ready to close with prayer? Okay, we'll close off with prayer and I'll end the recording and then we'll leave the room open. Dear gracious, loving God in heaven and earth, the developments of yesterday did not come as a surprise to you. And you have things under your control. You do see the end from the beginning, and you know where this will be leading. And it's wonderful for us to know that, and to know that truth triumphs, justice wins. That you, with your people, are going to be triumphant. In the meantime, Lord, we just ask that you will watch over all of the women and the young people and the children, that the decision in the United States yesterday by the Supreme Court are going to so adversely affect, and their families, their loved ones, all of the scenarios, the circumstances. And this is unbending. This is, as Murray said, making women second-class citizens, females second-class citizens. We've been there. Progress was being made away from that. But at the same time, it's very evident the regression that is happening and the authoritarian agenda on the conservative side of things just building. And there are going to be more sad developments in the days ahead. So we just ask, Lord, that you'll be with us, give us wisdom, give us the unction of thy Spirit as we interact with other friends and acquaintances and family members on this very issue. And we just ask, Lord, that many eyes will be opened. You know, one of the radical feminists made comment that in many ways she felt it would be a good thing if Roe v. Wade was overturned once and for all, in that it would be such a shock. 2022 people that have maybe had their heads in the sand, and it may have a positive effect in terms of rallying people to understand the issues and to possibly even revisit their own perspective. We pray that all in the movement will have the right perspective, will see things aright in the weeks ahead. And we just thank you, Lord, for blessing us in this Sabbath time. Be with us the remainder of the Sabbath day. In Jesus' name, amen.